And I serve as a John and Adrian Mars Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. And it's a real privilege to be able to join with you this morning and our colleagues here on the panel to discuss an issue that I think is of utmost interest to all of you and to the industry and the community we serve, and that, of course, is workforce development. Now, you may be asking, why is a museum director sort of part of this panel? And I think it goes back to what the Air and Space Museum and other museums like it are all about. And that's serving as a point of inspiration, that moment of awe, that spark where we ignite that interest, most often with younger audiences, but not exclusively. And we've been quite successful at it for some time, as many of you know. In fact, I can dare say that many of you in this audience are in the profession you are because of a visit, if not to the Air and Space Museum as a child, one like it. We know that because people tell us that. And in fact, we had Dr. John Mather, the astrophysicist leading up the James Webb Space Telescope project, meeting with us 2 nights ago, who said that very thing. I went to a museum as a child in New York and subsequently at the Air and Space Museum in Washington, and that's what led me to my career. So we know museums have that impact, cultural institutions. But when we talk about the arc of engagement and how do we take that young mind that has that sense of awe and inspire them to the point of learning where they eventually ascend into the careers that this industry so desperately needs. So that is how we're framing the issue, and joining me, as I mentioned, are some guests that I'll introduce as we go along to help frame this issue of workforce development and how does academia, government, cultural institutions, and business align our efforts in a way that fill out that arc of engagement so that we're in fact attracting the best and the brightest into this industry and the future that it holds for our success going forward. So starting, Barry Butler, you lead Embry-Riddle University, the nation's foremost aeronautical university. Talk about this issue from your perspective.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I was one of those people that was inspired by the Air and Space Museum, by the way, as a child, so I want to recognize you and the museum for that. You know, in our fields, when I look at engineering, aeronautical science, or professional pilot, and then maintenance, you know, engineering has seen a significant growth probably over the last decade across the country, not just at Riddle, but other places. That's a good sign. That's come, I think, from a lot of hard work. There's been efforts for almost 2 decades now to try to inspire more and more in those areas, and it's paying off. You're seeing increased enrollments across the country on a pretty much a steady increase. We've seen it as well at Embry-Riddle. We tend to focus more on the aeronautical engineering side of it, and we've seen significant increases in the last couple of years. So those are good signs, but we're also competing, we meaning the industry is competing with a lot of other industries, you know, for that talent. So that's something to think about. When you look at the aeronautical science, which of course supplies the workforce in the professional piloting areas, we've seen significant increases. That's a good sign, I think, for those of you operating airlines and cargo and other areas as well. One interesting fact to keep in mind is during the sort of the low point of COVID, when pretty much every airplane was sitting on a ramp somewhere, and there were very, very few flights, and the vaccine hadn't been developed yet, we saw record applications, and we're still seeing it in the aeronautical science. I think that's a good sign in terms of how can a young generation be so, you know, excited about a career when the entire industry was pretty much sitting still at that time. And I think it's a good sign and says something about young people and their vision for the future. They saw that there was a career out there, and they knew it was tough at the time, but they applied and they're in the system now, and that wave of students will go out, so that's good. I think the one area we need to really focus on is the maintenance side. I think that's an area where they pretty much have been stagnant for a number of years, and I think collectively we need to work on ways of getting that, because the demand is of course going up as well in those areas.
Thank you. Andrea and Sarah, you serve as the Executive Vice President at Booz Allen Hamilton's aerospace practice, and as I understand, focus on creating pathways for veterans leaving active service, entering the civilian workforce, and in particular, STEM careers from your perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea and Sarah. As Chris mentioned, I lead over 3,000 employees focusing on the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Space Force, and NASA. Every day, I feel the kind of crunch of not enough talent. We'll hire over approximately 1,000 people this year, and that won't be enough. So while we focus on early development STEM in high schools and colleges, that really builds our future pipeline, but we have an immediate need now in the industry. And so while we continue to invest in STEM in high school and colleges, we're looking at kind of a workforce that exists today that really we need to tap into immediately. And Chris, that is really the military community. We believe that retooling the military community can really close that gap. With 200,000 men and women transitioning every year, that is a very ripe population. Number one, they've been providing service to the country and they want to continue to provide that service. Number two, they're extraordinary leaders. And number three, they have the aptitude to retool. So that is really the population that we're focusing on. There's a lot of programs out that are about for industry leaders and corporations to take advantage of. One is our Mill Tech Work Initiative. That's really important because it shares with our transitioning men and women a pathway to a more technical career that industry really is requiring. Those pathways provide certifications, they provide opportunities for training to use either their GI Bills or companies like Booz Allen provide that training in-house, cyber, DevSecOps, AI, ML. We are constantly investing in the talent, whether they come to Booz Allen or not. We're investing in this community, and I think it's critical that industry continues to work through programs like that. Secondly, there are fellowship programs that I highly, highly recommend for our men and women that are transitioning because it gives them practical experiences in corporations so that when they do ultimately transition out, they understand kind of the opportunities ahead, and there are so many opportunities ahead. So we're really bullish on really training our military men and women who are transitioning. I think that is a critical requirement to continue to close the gap. Unfortunately, in this industry, in the aerospace industry, for tech talent, I don't know that we'll completely close the gap, but I think in partnerships with universities, with industry, and with the government, we can do our part in better meeting the needs that are available today.
Great, thank you. And rounding out our panel, of course, is Marion Blakey. Marion is no stranger to this industry, having served as the president and CEO of Rolls-Royce North America, the FAA, and a number of other jobs throughout the industry over a long and esteemed career. You now serve on a number of boards, including the Air and Space Board, for which we are most appreciative. If you could, from your perspective, speak for a moment on what the industry is doing in the area of retention. Once we get the talent into the industry, what are we doing or what do we need to do to retain that talent?
No, it's a great question, Chris, and something that I've had to think about in all the roles that you mentioned, be it government or corporate or now on boards, looking at what we really should put in place to keep particularly the good talent, the people that we clearly want from a diverse workforce and work through it. But before I get into that, I have to thank this lady here because Carol Hallett has put this summit together for years and years. It's a wonderful tradition. And could we have a round of applause for Carol on this? I've been privileged to be a part of it, and I just want to thank her personally. Thinking about retention, I think it's important to realize that obviously we have been through the last 4 years a pretty tough time. But as you look at it over time, you do see that the A&D, aerospace and defense industry, does have a higher loss rate than you see in industry across the board. The last 4 years, for example, we've seen somewhere between 3 and 5% of employees across industry voluntarily leave. Look at it in the A&D industry, and it's more like 5 to 7% And by the way, we are worse off than we are in the rest of the tech industry, where you would think the problems might be similar, but apparently not. So it's an area that I think we really do need to focus on because, as you've heard with this panel, inspiring at a young age, bringing people in through the traditional and not so traditional academic courses, tapping new strains of talent in the military, et cetera, all of that's great. But if you can't keep them, you know, then there's the problem. And what I have found looking at this from a lot of perspectives and reading the literature is that there's not enough attention on the question of once you get them in, great onboarding, put them in the jobs, tell them there's a career path, but do you really cultivate those people? And do you really have a plan, a mentor, a group, a program that keeps them engaged? This is obviously harder because right now this workforce is really expecting a great deal of flexibility. Work from home is a fact of matter that we're going to be living with. But, and that does not, by the way, cut particularly well on retention because if you're sitting there in isolation, not with your colleagues, it is harder to connect and relate. It's harder to feel a part of things. And so I think that the wise corporations and organizations are figuring out ways to bring people in part of the time, particularly for interactions, for their own programs and self-development, and, you know, put it to them that you really have a future here, so we need you on campus from a variety of vantage points. One other thing I'll mention, because sitting on boards, you have to make some tough decisions on compensation and budget. I'm a big proponent of not forgetting the people way down the pipeline when it comes to traditional compensation retention programs. We're all big on setting up our executives with, you know, 3-year retention plans, equity, cash, you know, restricted stock, et cetera. You may or may not be able to do it, depending upon your institution, corporation, with equity all the way down the line. Although I'm a big proponent of that. A little bit of stock in a company, a feeling that you own it, matters. But you really should be progressing people with retention plans that have some hooks in them that are sticky. So those are some early thoughts on
Very
this.
good, very good, thank you. Barry, at the Air and Space Museum, we see ourselves as a place of learning and have a number of partnerships with industry colleagues and academia. From your perspective, what partnerships do you see with industry that can help foster these pathways into careers in aerospace?
Yeah, so if you look at the list of attendees at this meeting, a lot of you have partnerships with universities, a lot of them with us as well, and those are outstanding. I think getting people on campuses as a start is really important. It may not seem like it to you because you work this every day, but for young people, you know, to see someone from the industry versus their professors is a huge difference. And so I'd encourage any of you that have that opportunity with your local colleges, your local universities, or wherever, just get people boots on the ground. It really means a lot. You may not think it when you're walking around campus, but it really has an impact. Students talk about you after you leave. They share what you know, maybe you have a presentation in class or something. Those sorts of partnerships are fairly low cost in their, you know, other than time and the energy to prepare something. You know, there's elevations of that. You know, there's different programs that are out there. I think one area that we have to focus on is the diversity of our student population, particularly in the aero side of things, and we all know what that is. It's not very good. And there are some good programs that some of you out in the audience have supported, and I think those are really important on the financial side, as well as the experience. One that we had, just highlight, we had announced at this meeting actually 4 years ago, I believe it was 4, was with Boeing, the major sponsor. It's a major endowment for students at Embry-Riddle in underrepresented and female students in any of the areas that support your industries. That program was kicked off not just with scholarship money, which is very important, but with visits to the facilities, mentorships, people in the classroom. It's about 5 or 6 different key areas. That program has produced, in the last 4 years, a cohort of students that, if I showed you sort of their class photo right now, you would say that is not what the industry looks like right now. It is as diverse as you can imagine. Bright young people, people that perhaps wouldn't have had a chance to go to college without that program. And now they are just anxious to get out and get to work. And I think those are the sorts of programs we need to focus on. The other thing I would mention briefly is getting young people on campuses is important. It's just getting people that look and, can relate to the 18-year-old who's sitting in a classroom. So some of your junior people that have just started, get them out there. That gives the excitement to the young people about, hey, that could be me in a few years if I just get finished with this degree. One other quick program I'll mention is on the military side of it, the transition side, through our worldwide campus, which is primarily working adults, let's just say. We have about 22,000 students enrolled in that. About half are military, and we have partnerships with industry there to help those individuals transition, as Andre was saying, into careers in your fields. We have a major program now with aviation maintenance, basically, to get people from military careers who've been doing work that would logically set them up for a career in the aviation maintenance field. They work with us while they're still in the service. They're assigned to us as students. And then the businesses who are supporting it then offer interviews. And it's had a 98% placement rate in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's a lot of little things like that.
Right. Very good. Andrea, a moment ago you spoke of the opportunity that the military and veterans provide or can provide our industry. But as we know, with every opportunity comes challenge. What are some of the challenges you see with helping transition veterans into STEM fields in particular?
Yeah, Chris, I think it's twofold. One is, I think transitioning men and women are inundated with information. And I think when they get so presented with, I'm not sure what certification to take, I'm not sure what program to kind of pursue, I think we need to streamline that and be very clear about the certifications that are required for the fields that we have right now this gap in capability. So I think that's on us as an industry to be much clearer in our expectations so that we're not misusing GI money or personal money to go out and get certifications that aren't valuable. So back to an earlier comment I raised, I really think we need to invest in these roadmaps for mil-tech talent out of the military and be very clear about here are pathways and here are the certifications you can get through any university or corporation. Two, back to Marion's point on retention, it is, in addition to not being able to identify talent, which is on most business leaders' minds every day, the second point is retaining the talent once we have it. And I think we as an industry need to do a better job, to Marion's point, providing retention programs for leaders that join us. So those leaders that are joining us from the military, it is a very different, Barry and I were talking about it earlier, it's a very different environment coming into a corporate structure. We need to show the pathway for future career development, but also, to Marion's point, show a retention strategy, because it's a lot to invest in new candidates coming into any corporation that's in this room or not in this room today. And once you have the phenomenal talent, you want to do everything in your power to retain it. For all of the clients that we serve, and for us, it's across the U.S. Air Force, Space Force, and NASA, it's critical that we retain that learning and that experience.
Indeed. Marion, I'd like to expand on a point that Barry made a moment ago about how if you look at a class today, it appears much more diverse than just not too long ago. In that regard, what additional steps can we make to open up the field to more diverse audiences?
Well, I think number one, not be too self-congratulatory about it as an industry, because it is absolutely true that if you look at university populations and you look at a lot of the programs, we're doing a lot better. But if you look at the absolute rock-hard stats, you will see that right now, overall professional women, for example, in the population, about 49%. They're lower than it's fewer than 25% in aerospace and defense. blacks, Hispanics, others, the statistics are no better. And it's important for us to recognize that that is the state of affairs. And we do have to have specialized and particular programs that ask them, you know, I believe in employee affinity groups. I think they're great and, you know, use them very effectively in a couple of different corporations. And give them money. Again, I hate to be crass, guys, but, you know, it's not just a pat on the back. So things like that really do matter. And I also think, you know, that we really ought to be looking at the fact that we've got an aging population in our group, more so than the overall population. The numbers of people age 55 and older are higher for us. And what we often don't recognize is if you look at the population of a company, everyone points to the great leaders they've got who are diverse, you know, but if you look down in it, you'll see that there are gaps. And one of the things that I think we're not doing enough of that we really could to engage minority students as well as all the other younger people coming in is high tech. They don't want to be trained with pen and paper. AI, you know, bring them into some things that employ virtual reality and give them a sense that they are really, you know, what they see in gaming and other places. It's an investment, yes, but it's an important thing to give people a sense that they really are part of a cutting edge industry as opposed to one that's, you know, yeah, important, but not in the sense that it really is meaningful in their own lives. So those are things that occur to me right off as to what one does.
Thank you. And as we sort of move into, investing for the future, earlier I referenced the fifth grader visiting the museum and having that initial sense of awe and that spark and that interest. Let's move forward to the rising college-bound junior, senior, who perhaps followed that arc of engagement. But what are we doing, or what can we do, both with academia and industry, to reach that audience with the career opportunities, to educate them as to what the opportunities are and why they should pursue a career in aerospace?
Yeah, so I think that the industry, yesterday's conference focused a lot on space, and people may not realize it, but the impact of space, especially commercial space in the last decade, has actually had a huge impact on the students we're seeing, particularly in engineering. So 10 years ago, if you polled the aeronautical engineering students, aerospace engineering students, you know, what area do they want to go to work in? They all want to go in some area, you know, in this room, but it was really heavily towards the aviation side of the house. The most recent polls we've done of our students, it's about 50-50. In other words, you've got 50% of those students who are pursuing degrees in aerospace engineering have actually declared, you know, in their mind and actually in the courses they're taking, that they kind of like the space side of it. Commercial space has had a huge role in that, and I don't think it was intentional, it just happens. You know, they're out there watching the launches. We have to cancel classes when there's a launch because they're, you know, we're only 40 miles north of the Cape, and so everybody's outside, nobody's in the classroom. But the space side of it is having an impact. So those of you in the space, you know, side of things, thank you. It's really doing a great thing for us. But before that, there's all these other programs, and they're distributed all over the country, in the world. A lot of companies, a lot of universities are engaged with the younger audiences. Air and Space, again, the museum is a great starting point. But there's a huge gap between there and the time they enter college. And so all of the programs that are happening right now have to sort of address that audience, you know, and keep them engaged throughout that time, particularly the ones who don't have the resources to have mom and dad send them off to a special camp in the summer. We know people go to the museum, get excited, and then mom and dad, if they have the money, send them off to a camp. That's great, but not all of them have those resources to be able to do it. So how do you keep that sort of that gap between, let's say, fifth grade and college alive? It's through programming, it's through local scout activities, it's through things in the community, you know, whatever goes on in your local communities, industry-sponsored activities. One that is really outstanding in our arena is our state in Florida. We operate both in Florida and Arizona, but in Florida, the state of Florida for the last 10 years has put in roughly $3 million a year into aviation and aerospace education in the high schools that we deliver. So we're in 56 different school districts in the state of Florida. We touch roughly 5,000 students a year in the state of Florida, because it's state money, of course. And they're getting dual credit, high school and college credit. And that pipeline over the last 10 years has produced, tens of thousands of people who have, many of them have worked their way into some technical type area. They obviously don't all come to us. They go to other schools around the country, and that's fine. But they're helping support that need for the workforce in our particular state of Florida, which is pretty significant. So it's a big dollar program, but it's impacting thousands of students. Maybe 5,000 enrolled this year alone throughout the state. And we hope that, if half of those find their way into the profession, great. That's going to help us all.
Excellent. Andrea, on that point, any thoughts to add in terms of that population of high schoolers and how we sort of make the pitch in an effective way?
I feel like I make this pitch every day because I have young girls in my home, and I think I just had that conversation this morning with my 12-year-old. I'm constantly pitching fields and technology, following in my footsteps in engineering. I think we need to address K through 12, right? That is where we need to start. And again, because I'm a mother of 2 young daughters, I see how fast they move away from technology because they're fearful of it. It's fascinating watching this inside my own house as I'm trying to advocate for programs. One program that I would highly advocate for is in the U.S. Air Force, they have a Cyber Patriot program. It's a program that any corporation can invest in, and it's picking up kids K through 12. And it's picking up kids who have an interest, and to Barry's point, maybe don't have the financial means to go off to a summer camp in technology or engineering or space. But it allows us to partner with those families within that really critical years of middle school, high school. And when they work for our corporation, they're trained in cybersecurity. We help them through college. And so by the time they graduate from a university, most of these individuals have clearances that allow them to come work for us full-time and support our clients in cleared environments. 2, they have great educations, and we are now retaining the talent that we've invested in. Whether they stay with our corporation or not, we're adding more cybersecurity engineers. So that's point 1. Point 2, we have a summer games program. Highly recommend, most corporations have this. These are kind of competitive positions to achieve. Once you're inside, you work in team-based environments, engineering, all types of STEM, but we also take liberal arts. And it's really the combination of a team environment, which most of us in this room work in every day. None of us do our jobs on our own, and that's what we teach young people that are in the university settings to kind of apply their current learnings to a practical application for us in the U.S. Air Force, Space Force, and NASA. And then with the goal of really continuing those young leaders and minds to hopefully retain talent in the aerospace community.
Wonderful. In a minute and a half remaining that we have, if I may ask each of you to define what is success and how will we know that we've reached it? And I'll start with you, Marion.
Well, I think we know success when we don't have to have panels like this. I mean, it's an assumed thing that we're succeeding in these areas, and we have a workforce that both looks like America and is highly trained in fields that China and elsewhere take as a de rigueur to train their young people. But I also would issue sort of a call to everyone here to, go back into your community and check the partnerships that are between the city government, the schools, the HBCUs, and corporations, and see if there are not gaps that you can step into and plug. Because cities all over the country are doing this right now, and it really is highly effective. There's some great success programs.
I was impressed upon that it's important to stay on schedule. So Marion, you're going to have the final word, so thank you for that. Please join me in 2 things. Thanking our panel and their commitment to our industry, but also again to you, Carol, for all you've done for each of us. Thank you.